Well, good morning. It is great to all be gathered together as one community this morning. Thank you for leaning in and coming at 10 o'clock. I know that we normally worship Saturdays at 5, Sundays 9 and 11. There's something really special that happens when we gather as one body at one time to worship together, to hear God's word together, to break bread together. So thank you for being flexible. As Ken Holt likes to say, flexible and adaptive. That's how he does all of his work. Thank you for being flexible and adaptive. This morning, I read from the Gospel of Matthew, and I read what is known as the most famous sermon Jesus ever gave. If there's one speech, one teaching, one piece of wisdom that we lift up as his greatest encouragement, his greatest words to the disciples and to the world, it's found right there in Matthew. We call it the Beatitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. You know, as a preacher, I don't know about you, Alex, but I spend far too much time thinking of the opening word, the opening line, the opening hook. Once you get that, the rest of it just starts to flow, right, Pat? I see Pat Badke nodding her head. We struggle at times with how do I begin? Do I begin with the story? Do I begin with, hey, good morning, how are you doing? And no, you got to start powerful. You got to start with something that grabs attention. And in the most well-known sermon he ever gave, Jesus starts with a single word. Blessed. Blessed. This is a word for us that I think we've lost the true sense of meaning around. When we think of blessed or blessed, we often think of joy, prosperity, the good things in our lives. And I'm not here to tell anyone not to call the gift of your family or the gift of those good things in your lives a blessing. I think they are. But what Jesus does in his most famous sermon is reorient the word blessing, blessed, so that all people, everyone, has access to this gift from God. You know, Jesus came onto the scene to do his public ministry in a world that was wrought with chaos, cruelty, and despair. He was doing ministry along the countryside where everyday people were facing an occupation of foreign soldiers and governments. The world, when Jesus did ministry, was cruel and not kind. The world was hell-bent on labeling people, insiders and outsiders. Real people were suffering real tragedies every day. And it's in the midst of that we're told, seeing the crowds, and not just the people, I believe Jesus saw their pain. He saw their angst. He saw their fear. He saw how overwhelmed they were at the culture and the context in which they were living. And it's then that he went up onto the mountain, the place where God historically through the scriptures speaks. The place of divine revelation. Jesus goes up to the mountain just like Moses had, just like Abram had with his son. Jesus goes up the mountain, he sits down, and it's there that his disciples come to him. And now, in Matthew's version, the Beatitudes aren't spoken to the entire crowd. They're spoken to his inner circle. Because I think Jesus wanted to make clear to those that were following him most closely, that were wrapped up in the miracles, in the miraculous. Jesus wanted them to understand a new definition of what it meant to be blessed. You can imagine Jesus sitting on the mountaintop with his closest friends gathered around. And down below are the huddled masses of people longing for a word of hope, some relief. And it's in the context of that scene where we're told Jesus opened his mouth and he taught them. Blessed are those people whose necks have been trampled on. Blessed are those who cry out every day because of a system of injustice and pain that is perpetuated by those in power. Blessed are the people that those who have luxury and have all the control fail to even acknowledge. Blessed are those whose voices feel weak and wonder if they even make a difference. Blessed are those who deep in their bones want nothing but righteousness, justice, equity, want to live, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the pure in heart. And the line that struck me, and I can't shake given our world right now, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. This is not a Hallmark card. Jesus isn't offering saccharine sentiment. These aren't light words. That world that I spoke about, that Jesus operated in, would crucify him, would kill him, would nail him to a piece of wood and ridicule him and mock him and make fun of him and spit on him. Jesus came to show the world a different way of being. God's vision, where everyone, every day, is seen, acknowledged, accepted, and valued. A world not guided by the right and the wrong choices you make that determine your fate, but a world guided by grace. A world not marked by transactional living, but one rooted in relationship, where we value the other, not for what they can do for us, but because they matter, because they have intrinsic worth. A world where all people, no matter their social location, their status, no matter their background, slave or free, male or female, Jew or Gentile, where intergenerations and intercultures could have an impact together. And Jesus taught all of this, and he gave his life for all of this, because it was the only thing that would have been relevant. Because what he sought to do was reform a system in a world that had gone astray. And so Jesus took the greatest force, the greatest source of strength and power ever created, love, and he set out into that world, and he came down that mountain. And he taught in synagogues, and he taught on street corners, and he met people who were blind and overlooked, who were sitting by the pool of Siloam, waiting for someone to help them for years, and he acknowledged them. He spoke to women at a well who were there in the middle of the day for shame of the other women and what they would say to her. Jesus set out into this world, imperfect and broken and cruel, and he loved with a strength and a power that had never been experienced before. A strength and a love that equipped him in the moment of his greatest moment of agony to say, Father, forgive them. They have no idea what they're doing. Jesus never stopped loving. And in doing so, I believe Jesus painted a portrait of what true abundance looks like, which is not wrapped up in having all the power, all the control, all the force, all the strength. It's not even wrapped up in controlling the narrative, which we know people in systems of power and force and coercion love to do, don't they? Things would be spread about this Christ, lies and slanders. People would persecute his followers, and yet what we have, and the reason you are sitting here today and I am standing before you today, is because of the gift of love that Christ first modeled. I don't know if you feel this way. I imagine you do. I have horrible anxiety right now about the state of our country and our world. I'm sick with what's happening. I think a lot of people are wondering, is there any community? Is there any institution? Is there any source of people or place in our society today that does not run on outrage? Everything seems to be running off of chaos and outrage and anger and hatred. Do you know why the church exists? To be a countercultural community where people of all backgrounds, all abilities, all ages, all persuasions can come together and orient their life around something other than outrage. Something called love. Something called hope. Something called peace. The church does not exist, and Good Shepherd certainly does not exist to preserve the institution of the church. The church exists in its best form to orient people around a different story, because both stories cannot ultimately be true. The world's story of pain and God's story of perseverance, love, and victory in the midst of it. You know, the church doesn't exist to escape the chaos and the cruelty and despair of the world. The church exists to show the world that while it's falling apart, blessing still is relevant. Hope is still accessible. Love is still possible. Years ago, I found myself on a rooftop in Haiti. It was the first time I had ever been to Haiti. I was an intern at Abiding Hope Church, the founding congregation of the Haitian Timoun Foundation. I was experiencing the beautiful people of Haiti and their culture. I had learned all week about the odds stacked against them. I would later go on to do my doctoral dissertation on the systemic injustice and hatred that created the modern state of Haiti. That whole drive to pursue that began on that first trip. I had been to other parts of the world as a soldier where I had seen people oppressed, held back and held down because of who they were, what tribe they belonged to. But it was a wholly different experience to be in a place like Haiti where at the same time, I saw two things happening at once. A world system of cruelty and injustice dating back to systemic racism, slavery, exploitation. And yet at the same time, that all of that oppression and all of that pain had been compounded year over year, decade over decade, century over century. At the same time, there were people rising up in the midst of the rubble, loving with a strength I had never seen before. Not accepting the world's definition of those women in the Central Plateau of Haiti who were discounted as not even counting on the human census. And at the same time, we see the system of oppression and cruelty. If you had eyes to see it, you would also see in great clarity, in living color, the hope and the resilience and the beauty. And sitting on that rooftop, I was transported back years before to Iraq. And at the time, a young soldier. on a Christmas morning, after news of attacks and the pain and the fear and the months compounded with a front row seat to the story as old as Cain and Abel, brothers of different backgrounds tearing each other apart. Why? And yet on that Christmas morning in the dining hall, Christmas carols playing over the loudspeaker, sitting there in between these two worlds and yearning and hoping that the world depicted through the carols could be true. I stand before you today as one of your pastors, feeling like I'm back in that dining hall or I'm on that rooftop. Church, the world is in crisis. The world is turned in on itself right now. And the worst thing we could do is act as if none of it's happening. The world needs the church now more than ever. But now more than ever, the church needs to be in the world. The church needs to be in the world, standing up for neighbors who are being unjustly persecuted, prosecuted without due process in our country. The world needs to stand up for righteousness, for the way of Jesus. The world needs to show, the church needs to show the world what true strength looks like, which is always and only for Christians the power of love. So on our Vision Sunday, in a few minutes, an hour or so, we'll gather back in here and we'll talk all about the institutional strength of Good Shepherd. And I'm here to tell you, I'm probably the proudest person in the room about it. I love this place. We're going to look at figures and numbers, and you'll flip through your annual report and you'll see, hopefully, that Good Shepherd is strong, vibrant. But let us never forget why Good Shepherd exists. It's not to increase worship numbers. It's not to balance budgets. It's not to preserve the institution for the institution's sake. Good Shepherd Lutheran Church exists to show the world there is a more perfect way. And that way is marked by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, whose love is strong, whose hope is endless, whose mercy is for you, for your neighbor, and even for those we might call enemy. May that be our guiding North Star today and always. Amen.